introduce also Minister évidemment from Togo, Paul Collier, Shahman Sumov from Azerbaijan, Freeport McMahon, Henning Reinfeldt. Good morning, gentlemen.
Yes, exactly.
Publish what you pay. Can I introduce
Yes,
myself?
absolutely.
I'm the national coordinator for Publish What You Pay UK. Our outgoing director, Maringa Henriette, is not available to join the panel today. Can I ask my colleagues to sit in and provided acceptable to yourselves? I'm happy to do so.
Very good.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
Hello? Oh, my goodness. Good morning to you all, and welcome to the first plenary session on the last day of this conference. My name is Fredrik Reinfeldt. I'm the newly elected chair of the International Board of EITI. I know that there has been a very good conference and a very good expo next to us, and I hope you have visited that, and I want to thank everyone who has made that possible. I know that there have been discussions regarding the membership meeting that we held Tuesday, and I think it was unfortunate that civil society representatives were not there present, and I'm going to say a few more words about that in the afternoon. But I hope you respect that we now have a distinguished panel and that we will move into a very interesting subject of how to handle the situation with the falling prices of oil and other commodities. So I think we first have a video to present this. Is that correct? Maybe not. It says so in my program, but it's okay. You know the situation. We have an oil price that is now down with 70%. I saw the Qatari oil minister on CNN this morning talking about maybe a bounce back of the price up at 50 again, but the truth is that we are very close to 30. And of course, mining companies are under even greater pressure, and projects are being cancelled and delayed. Production is being scaled back, and actually companies are going under in this situation. You know, the wild projections that we had from revenues from mega gas finds in places like East Africa look far from bringing the kind of bonanza of public revenue and jobs that once were taken for granted. The currencies in many countries are under pressure, and some countries have turned to IMF for assistance. So, in this environment, the question is, now we really need trust, and we need well-informed policy, and I think that need is stronger than ever. And the benefits of getting extractive industry governance rights are, of course, enormous. I was myself a couple of weeks ago in Nigeria, and the Nigerian IETI has already recovered $2.4 billion in taxes, and the National Secretariat, when we met them, is confident that it will recover almost 10 billion more in the process of working with EITI. And furthermore, they've also done recommendation when it comes to scrapping controversial crude oil swaps and restructuring of the national oil company, and also on reviewing contracts and subsidies that are being now actually implemented by the new government. So they are making real change happening. And that, of course, could all put together save Nigerians billions of dollars, and that should be compared against the cost of implementation bill, which is around $6 million a year. So, with this background and this framework, we now have a distinguished panel to discuss this situation and the role of EITI and transparency. And I'm going to introduce them. First, we have Dedrivé Ablé-Bidamon, which is the Minister of Mines and Energy of Togo. Sir Paul Collier from Oxford University. Harry Red Conger, who is the President and Chief Operating Officer, Americas and Africa Mining, Freeport-McMoRan. Shahmar Mosomov, who is the Executive Director of State Oil Fund in Azerbaijan, also been on the board of EITI for many years. Rintaro Tamaki, which is the Deputy Secretary General of the OECD, and Miles Litvinov, who is the British Coordinator for Publish What You Pay. So you're all welcome, and first, Minister, for your introduction.
Voilà, bonjour tout le monde. Comme le modérateur l'a dit, je suis M. Ablé-Bidamon, le ministre des Mines et de l'Énergie du Togo. Son Excellence, M. Forest Azimna Gnassingbé, qui avait bien voulu être parmi vous ce matin et pour des raisons totalement indépendantes de sa volonté, n'a pas pu faire le déplacement. Il ne voulait pas m'avoir, vous exprimer ses profonds regrets. Et il m'a fait alors l'insigne honneur de délivrer le message qu'il avait voulu lui-même vous délivrer. Et le message, c'est le suivant. Monsieur le Président du Conseil d'administration de l'ITIE, chers panélistes, distingués invités, Mesdames et Messieurs, au nom de l'ensemble de la délégation togolaise, je voudrais tout d'abord saluer les efforts déployés par les autorités péruviennes pour nous offrir les meilleures conditions de travail et de séjour à l'occasion de cette 7e conférence mondiale de l'ITIE qui nous réunit ici à Lima. Je tiens également à adresser mes remerciements aux organisateurs de la conférence pour l'occasion qui m'est donnée d'apporter la contribution du Togo aux échanges sur le thème retenu pour le présent panel, à savoir l'amélioration de la gouvernance alors que les prix des matières premières sont bas. Ce thème est aujourd'hui imposé par l'actualité elle-même. Depuis quelque temps, en effet, tous les gouvernements, qu'ils soient producteurs ou non de pétrole, sont contraints de procéder à des réajustements permanents de leur politique économique et sociale en raison de la chute vertigineuse des prix de cette ressource naturelle. Au-delà des produits pétroliers, c'est tout le secteur des industries extractives qui est périodiquement touché par ces fluctuations. En dehors des perturbations qu'elles provoquent sur le marché international, la chute vertigineuse des prix des ressources tirées des industries extractives a un impact social direct, en particulier dans les pays économiquement vulnérables où les imprévus déstabilisent considérablement les processus de programmation budgétaire. Le remède à cette fragilité qui est commune à de nombreux États réside dans la capacité à mieux préparer l'avenir en mettant l'accent sur la prévoyance. Distingués invités, mesdames et messieurs, nos ressources minières n'étant pas inépuisables, la meilleure manière d'en pérenniser les bienfaits consiste à améliorer constamment la gouvernance dans l'intérêt du plus grand nombre. La bonne gouvernance dans les industries extractives se présente donc comme une exigence fondamentale et un véritable pari que nous prenons sur l'avenir. C'est aussi un enjeu immédiat de survie car dans la plupart des pays de l'ITIE, l'attitude à atteindre les objectifs des politiques sociales dépend dans une large mesure de la mobilisation des ressources internes dont une part importante est générée par les revenus tirés des industries extractives. Cette réalité donne une dimension nouvelle aux engagements auxquels nous avons souscrit en adhérant à l'ITIE. La conjoncture actuelle, marquée par la baisse significative des prix des matières premières, nous contraint à accorder une plus grande attention à leur mode de gestion en mettant l'accent sur la transparence qui est l'un des fondamentaux de la bonne gouvernance. Le respect des normes de l'ITIE est devenu pour le gouvernement un impératif salutaire et je voudrais dans cette perspective exprimer toute ma gratitude à la très honorable Madame Clark Short et toute son équipe pour le service inestimable qu'elle a rendu au Togo en accompagnant tout au long du processus d'adhésion à l'ITIE. Au Togo, le secteur extractif apporte une contribution somme toute modeste à l'économie nationale de l'ordre de 1% du PIB. Nous avons cependant résolu de lui accorder toute l'attention requise car la discipline instaurée par le processus de l'ITIE contribue par elle-même à remodeler nos sociétés dans leurs fondements et leur inculquer une nouvelle éthique dans la gestion des ressources publiques. Mon pays, le Togo, a fait ces dernières années une perspective enrichissante dans ce domaine. Déclaré pays conforme à l'ITIE en 2013, le Togo a connu depuis lors des mutations importantes qui ont eu un impact significatif sur la vie des populations. Ainsi, grâce au processus de l'ITIE, à la transparence que le gouvernement s'est imposé de faire prévaloir à tous les niveaux, les populations sont tenues informées des ressources versées aux collectivités locales des zones d'exploitation minière sur la base des taxes perçues par l'État auprès des sociétés d'exploitation. Par exemple, dans les zones de production de calcaire et des phosphates situées dans les préfectures de Voie de Zio, dans la partie méridionale du Togo, ces ressources sont utilisées pour appuyer le développement local, notamment à travers la construction des infrastructures sociales de base telles que les écoles, les dispensaires et les forages. Il faut noter que la pratique des ristournes existait bien avant l'adhésion du Togo à l'ITIE. Mais avec le processus de l'ITIE, leur gestion par les collectivités locales concernées est devenue plus rigoureuse et plus transparente, grâce notamment aux droits de regard que les populations bénéficiaires exercent désormais sur l'affectation de ces ressources. L'adhésion au processus de l'ITIE a également permis au Togo de faire de la communication un outil de promotion de la transparence dans le secteur des industries extractives. La publication de chaque rapport annuel de l'ITIE donne ainsi lieu à une campagne de dissémination à l'échelle nationale qui permet de mettre en lumière les manquements relevés. La dissémination systématique des rapports annuels ainsi que leur traduction dans les langues nationales ont contribué à maintenir la société civile en éveil sur les questions touchant la reddition des comptes dans les industries extractives. La fusion des principes, mais aussi à lever toute opacité sur l'affectation des ressources tirées des industries extractives. Tous ces progrès imprègnent désormais la vie publique où le citoyen tient une place qui lui permet de demander des comptes à l'État et aux entreprises. C'est cette culture de reddition des comptes que nous attendons vulgariser par tous les moyens pour approfondir les mutations sociétales qui ont été amorcées au Togo depuis notre adhésion à l'ITIE. Mais comme chacun le sait, l'ITIE est un processus exigeant et sa mise en œuvre au Togo n'a pas été exempt de défis. Au lancement du processus de l'ITIE, nous avions rencontré des réticences et parfois même des résistances. Certaines sociétés ne se sont pas pliées de bonne grâce à l'exigence de certification des comptes par les commissaires aux comptes. Ce manque de collaboration avait d'ailleurs causé des écarts entre les données contenues dans les déclarations des sociétés extractives et les données figurant dans les comptes du Trésor public. Pour réconcilier ces données, le ministère des Mines et le ministère de l'économie et des Finances ont pris le problème à bras-le-corps en enjoignant les sociétés concernées de procéder à la certification des comptes dans les délais et d'en communiquer les données à l'ITIE. Cette intervention a été renforcée par l'organisation des campagnes de sensibilisation à l'intention des sociétés d'État impliquées dans le secteur des industries extractives pour les amener à donner le bon exemple en se pliant à l'exigence de la certification des comptes. Grâce à toutes ces mesures, les entités gouvernementales qui perçoivent des revenus extractifs sont désormais auditées systématiquement par la Cour des comptes. Cette pratique oblige les entreprises extractives à se conformer aux exigences du processus déclaratif en prêtant notamment une plus grande attention à la tenue des registres et des livres comptables. Tout ce processus est traduit par une amélioration substantielle des rapports de l'ITIE qui ont nettement gagné en qualité. Ces améliorations qui rehaussent l'image de la gouvernance minière au Togo ne doivent cependant pas nous inciter à dormir sur nos lauriers. De nombreux défis restent à relever. L'exigence relative à la publication des propriétés réelles pour relever l'identité des actionnaires ou des propriétaires des sociétés opérant dans le secteur des industries extractives constitue sans doute un gage de transparence. Tout en étant légitime, cette exigence peut cependant, dans certains cas, être confrontée à certaines réalités culturelles et même constituer une source de découragement pour certains investisseurs étrangers. Pour pérenniser les idéaux de l'ITIE, nous devons donc mener une réflexion approfondie sur cette question épineuse en vue de trouver des mécanismes qui réconcilient, dans la mesure du possible, les standards internationaux et les réalités locales. Distingués invités, mesdames et messieurs, je demeure convaincu que c'est par l'apprentissage mutuel et à la lumière des espérances des uns et des autres que nous parviendrons à tracer de nouvelles voies vers un ancrage définitif de la transparence et de la bonne gouvernance dans le secteur des industries extractives. Cet objectif ne peut être atteint qu'en bâtissant une large coalition internationale impliquant les États, quel que soit leur niveau de développement, ainsi que la société civile dans le travail d'éveil et d'alerte permanente qu'exige la pérennisation de la lutte pour la transparence. Les partenariats que nous aurons à construire dans ce domaine viseront à encourager toutes les parties prenantes à garder le cap en coopérant activement à la mise en œuvre de l'ITIE afin de donner une meilleure assise à la pratique des déclarations certifiées au niveau des États, mais surtout en renforçant la fonction de contrôle dévolue à titre principal à la société civile. Le Togo, par ma voix, réaffirme son entière adhésion et son soutien à l'ITIE et continuera à œuvrer pour le triomphe des valeurs qu'elle entend promouvoir. Je vous remercie pour votre aimable attention. Voilà ainsi le message que le chef de l'État, son Excellence Faure Eswatini Gnassingbé, et Adema avait voulu lui-même le faire, mais malgré effectivement toute cette bonne volonté qu'il avait manifestée, d'autres contraintes l'ont obligé à ne pas pouvoir être là. Et je vous remercie pour votre aimable attention.
Well, thank you very much. We know the importance of mining in Togo, and I think you very well presented the case of EITI reporting helping to get better information to your people and better knowledge about the figures. An interesting question is, of course, as I related to Nigeria, have you felt also that this is a workable tool when it comes to finding taxes? I mean, a better tax situation with some of the companies present in your country. Is it also a tool to improve standards for government?
Merci, cher modérateur. Effectivement, l'ITE, comme je viens de le dire, au fait, c'est un engagement volontariste du gouvernement de l'adhérer. Donc, tout a commencé en 2009 avec l'engagement total du gouvernement à ce que cela soit traduit dans les faits. Et en 2010, un décret a été pris pour mettre en place des organes. Le pays a été déclaré à Sydney pays conforme. Effectivement, comme je l'ai dit, le gouvernement avait pour objectif de mettre en soit peu la transparence dans la gestion du secteur minier, et les normes et les principes de l'ITE, au vu du gouvernement, devaient permettre effectivement une meilleure visibilité, une meilleure transparence dans ce secteur. Et depuis que le Togo a fait la démarche depuis 2009 et a été conforme depuis 2013, et les rapports qu'il publie régulièrement ont permis effectivement de mettre de la transparence. Comme je l'ai dit, les défis sont encore nombreux, mais cela a obligé les sociétés qui travaillent effectivement dans ce secteur de pouvoir, c'est une des exigences, de pouvoir effectivement faire certifier leurs comptes par les commissaires aux comptes, et cela permet effectivement d'avoir la véracité, garantit la véracité effectivement des chiffres. Et dans chaque contrat minier, il y a aussi des exigences de contribuer au développement local. Effectivement, la publication de tous ces rapports et la dissémination auprès de la population permet à chacun de mesurer effectivement ce qui se fait et de réclamer. Comme on dit, effectivement, tous les partis sont impliqués, notamment la société civile, les regroupements locaux de défense des intérêts de chaque localité. Tout ceci, au vu des rapports, et la transparence de ces rapports permet à chacun de pouvoir effectivement revendiquer ses droits si ses droits sont bafoués. Donc c'est une très bonne chose. Hein. Et je le répète, ça a été une démarche volontariste du gouvernement et le gouvernement ne s'est pas trompé. Ça apporte ses résultats. On a encore des défis à relever et je pense qu'avec l'appui du secrétariat international, les progrès sont encore à faire et on arrivera à un point de transparence totale qui est notre objectif final. Je vous remercie.
Well, thank you very much. As you noticed during part of the Minister's intervention, we lost translation, and I'm sorry for that, but it's now back. That's, as you could say, also was some problem shortly with the electricity. But now we're back, and I now thank you for your answer. I now move to Sir Paul Collier from Oxford University.
Thanks very much. The end of the super cycle is a very important moment to look back and think what went right and what went wrong, and then try and learn from what went wrong. What went right? Well, I think if I had to choose one thing that went right, it was that a lot of poor countries got more investment in prospecting than they'd ever had before. And so a lot of poor countries discovered valuable new natural resources. That was really a valuable thing from the supercycle. What went wrong? If I have to look at one thing that went wrong, it stands out. It's that not enough of the revenues were used to acquire assets, whether they be assets abroad or investment at home. A lot too much of the revenues went into consumption, and indeed quite a few countries actually geared up that consumption by borrowing for consumption. And the countries that did that are now facing very difficult crisis times. So if there's one thing to learn from the supercycle, it's that much more needed to be put into assets instead of consumption. In order to do that, governments need to have the backing of informed societies. And I think the single message, the lesson from the supercycle, is that in many societies, they failed to build that informed society that would have enabled government to save and invest out of the revenues. And so my challenge to EITI is to say, transparency for what? It's not enough to get transparency in revenues. Without transparency in revenues, you're probably dead in the water. But it's not enough. It's transparency in a lot of other things. First and foremost, transparency in that use of revenues between assets and consumption. Right? So building transparency on that issue is, to my mind, the central task for the future, both of EITI and of what happens next time there's a supercycle. The right time to build informed societies is when prices are low. Because one lesson from the supercycle is that during the supercycle, populations get so excited by the thought that there's money coming out of the ground that they're inclined to lose focus. And so during the boom, it's too late to build an informed society. It's too late to put in place the rules, the institutions, and the understanding that underpins them. That time is now. If we do not do it now, then maybe we go through another missed opportunity, which is what the supercycle all too often was. So now, when people is still fresh in their minds, we blew this opportunity. The biggest opportunity many societies have ever had. And where are they now? They're back in crisis. Now is the time to learn from that situation and say never again. Some societies learn from crises, others are destined to repeat them. And EITI needs to move into an organization which makes sure that it's never again, rather than repeating history. Now let me say a few things about the challenge to the entire industry and then the entire society. And my message to both the industry and the civil society is that the key word here is partnership. It's long-term partnership. Resource extraction is a long-term activity. It's a long-term industry. A mine will typically last 40, 50 years. GM go bankrupt because it was defeated by Toyota. Why was it defeated by Toyota? Because Toyota built a model in which creating cars became a partnership with the workforce and a partnership with suppliers. It took a long-term view in each case. The partnership with the workforce was exemplified by the cord, called an andon cord, which hung all the way down the production line in a Toyota factory. Any worker could pull that cord and the entire production line would stop at a cost of $10,000 a minute. Why would anybody pull the cord? Why did Toyota want them to pull the cord if they saw a defect? Defects are treasures. If we can spot the defects, we can correct them. Initially, GM took photos of the Toyota factories. They said, what we need is robots. They got robots. It didn't help. Then they got andon cords. Didn't help because the line management knew that if they actually had these cords, when the workers wanted a coffee break, they'd pull them. And so the andon cords were tied up out of reach. The same with suppliers. Toyota built a partnership with suppliers to say, let's build cheap parts that are good. Let's have a partnership in solving the problems. GM treated its suppliers as enemies. Each time there was a fall in demand, they'd screw their suppliers to try and get costs down. Eventually, the GM management learnt, and they discovered they couldn't change their style. They couldn't move from short-termism to long-termism, to building these partnerships, and so they went bankrupt. I see across the natural resource sector many examples of GM and not many examples of Toyota. You're in a long-term business with short-term attitudes. If you think instead about partnership, companies are partners with governments in harnessing these resources, then companies have to be part of the conversation in building the asset base of the society. You've got to have a conversation both with civil society and business and governments which builds those long-term strategies. And so it's no good for NGOs to howl about we want spending now. It's no good for businesses to just focus on their own bottom line this year. Both have got to help governments to look long-term. Let me close with what is transparency for. It is not to vilify governments and accuse them of corruption. Transparency is to build a jointly informed society in which all the partners work to build the asset base which will gradually build a society out of poverty. As I suggested, first, transparency going forward needs to be about assets. What proportion of revenues are actually put into assets? Second, it needs to be about security. There's a brilliant new paper which I recommend called This Mine is Mine, which you can Google, This Mine is Mine, and it'll pop up. And what it shows, using georeference data across Africa, is that at the moment, over the last 20 years, mines have been associated with localized violence. Basically, mines are used by local gangs to extract resources which they use to buy the means of violence. And so local is not just cozy things about community. Local is about providing proper security so that the violent groups cannot actually exploit the resources. Thirdly, and particularly painfully, transparency is about elections. My latest research, which isn't yet published, but we've got the results, shows that the likelihood of a fraudulent election goes up substantially, the more valuable are natural resources in the society. Natural resource revenues have corrupted politics and corrupted the political process. And that needs to be fought against and remedied. One of my heroes, who's just coming to Oxford to work with me, was the chairman of the Independent Nigerian Electoral Commission at the last election, a man who bravely made sure that the last Nigerian election was an honest election. And that was a great example of a successful election in a resource-rich society. It's not sufficiently common. So, savings, security, elections, and then finally, the business which you started with, revenues, is still an unfinished business. I think the battle for transparency in revenues now needs to be expanded, especially to tackle issues of transfer pricing. Transfer pricing is complicated, but it can be tackled by proper transparency. But again, it's transparency for what? You need another layer of information in order to unbundle the mechanics of transfer pricing. So there's my wish list for EITI going forward. Now is the time to put in place the understanding in society that can actually harness the next super cycle. There will be a next super cycle, believe me, but let's make sure it's not a repeat of the last one. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sir Paul. As you've seen, we have now gone over to flashing lights up on the stage. We feel a little bit like rock stars. I don't know if that's how you perceive it. Very interesting. I can say that during your speech, I felt a lot of flashbacks to my time as Prime Minister. This total pressure on every government to spend at all times, coming from all parts of society. I totally agree. And it's very tough to stand against because it's always the right time to spend, and even by borrowing, as you pointed out. But coming to EITI, you made a good point. Transparency is not enough. We have heard that throughout the conference. But a lot of the EITI work boils down to actually getting the figures right, to see that they are reliable, timely, and comprehensive data. And just to ask you the obvious, okay, transparency is not enough, but we really need to do the work thoroughly, because what kind of debate and what kind of knowledge would you have if you do not have actually the correct data? It would be interesting to hear you reflect on that.
Yeah, of course you need the correct data. If you don't have the revenue numbers, you can't get started about questions about how is it used. So of course you need that. But I think the motivating spirit behind getting the numbers should not be, we're up against a bunch of crooks. That vilification of government is, I think, very dangerous. We've seen it, not in poor countries, we've seen it in America. And the upshot of vilifying government for 30 years is the mess that America's in now. Forgive my American friends. Right? And so the mantra of vilifying government is a road to nowhere. Right? Why do we need the numbers? Because government has a big job to do with that money. Without the money, it can't do the job. And that's why we need the transparency in the numbers. But then we also need to be supporting government in making good use of that money. So it's a positive agenda instead of a sort of criminalizing agenda. It's the motivating pressure. Why are we doing this? That I want to refocus, basically.
Thank you very much. And then, interestingly enough, turning this discussion on short-term, long-term, I think it's very timely to move over to Harry Red Conger with Americas and Africa Mining, Freeport McMoRan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, distinguished guests, government officials, my esteemed colleagues on the panel here. Great to be here this morning. We love Peru. It's great to be here in Lima and be with our colleagues here again. And I've had the opportunity to make new acquaintances and new friends here, and I look forward to meeting more of you as we work on these important issues. Freeport-McMoRan very much appreciates the work of the Extractives Industry Transparency Initiative. We appreciate the work that the member countries do towards these efforts and the work that our industry colleagues perform in advancing this agenda. These advances go hand in hand with member country development and progress, and we look forward to that enhancing extractive industries in general, and we intend for all of those entities to flourish as we go forward. It's good business for Freeport-McMoRan, helps us get better, and also helps others understand what the true costs are associated with extractive industries. From our point of view, we do not see anything even in any way. Just as we see in our safety and our environmental work that we perform every day and in our operations, those good practices make for efficient and cost-effective operations. We see the EITI work and efforts in that same light. These are practices that help make our business better, more cost-effective. We want to understand the impacts of falling prices. We need for our community and government stakeholders to understand the effects of these price cycles. Critics would say that, somebody, whether it be company, individuals, or the government, must be doing something suspect because revenues are down. It's a natural reaction that people would have. So the work that EITI does and that we're all engaged in can help neutralize that cynical speculation and help us focus on the facts. Here in Peru, pilot plans that go beyond reporting and auditing payments of companies to understand how regions use those funds will contribute to the efficient use of money in the benefit of the communities where mining takes place. So we see that as a great development as well. We also believe that these same tenets hold true for governments. Open books, transparent dealings make for sound outcomes and credible, reliable data about the value of I'd like to point out that EITI has a role at all times, but especially now in difficult economic circumstances, to evaluate the cost effectiveness of some of the auditing and other governance requirements. Can we streamline and simplify some of the requirements? For example, there are proposals to make the validation process more flexible, less expensive. In addition, the use of adaptive implementation to recognize legal and other circumstances that make strict compliance with the standard difficult or impossible. So we just ask everyone to work together. Let's evaluate our progress to date. Can we streamline? Can we make things more cost effective and work together to do that? Freeport-McMoRan is diligent on these efforts every day. We do this work day in and day out, but we also have a large delegation here working with our host countries. I'm proud that our representatives from Indonesia, Democratic Republic of Congo, here in Peru, and the United States are all here willing to work with everyone to make this process better. So again, we're honored to be a part of it. I thank you for the opportunity.
I think that was a very clear message on the need for transparency and against corruption. Also these messages on cost effectiveness has been on the discussion of the board, that we should adhere, and especially in these times, to see if we could have more efficient reporting. So we will definitely go on, have these discussions. It would be interesting, given what Sir Paul said about this long-term commitment, and when we met yesterday, you made that point that mining is really a long-term commitment to come in and stay for a very long time. Do you feel that the ITI process also helps you with that kind of accountability among the population in the countries that you are moving in? That's also to say, is it more than transparency? Is it helpful for you to use EITA even when it comes to these long-term commitments?
Yes, we do see the work here benefiting us much more than just the transparency. It goes to a way of dealing, business behavior, not only for us but for the people around us. The more you measure something that we find in our business, the better you get at it. And just to be clear again on issues of corruption, it's never one-sided. Every instance that we've ever seen, there are parties on both sides that are willing to engage in that behavior. So we're always looking inside our house first, not looking outside to blame others, but what can we do in our practices, in our business dealings to ensure that we practice the highest standards, that people around us understand that, and you can help to lead by example and good practice. So EITI has been a great process for us to be more introspective, learn from others on how to advance and get better, and that's what all improvement cycles are about. So we're grateful to be part of the effort.
Thank you very much. And now we're moving to Khakmar Mazumov from Azerbaijan. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chairman. Distinguished participants, esteemed panel, ladies and gentlemen, let me start by saying how pleased I am to see how EITI developed from a small revenue accounting initiative into such a big world standard. I met with Karina Litvak, who is also present here, and we were remembering how 10 years ago during the IAG International Advisory Group meetings, we were talking about the terminology, the compliant country, the candidate country. We're coining those words that has become well known around this initiative. Yesterday we had a members meeting, and the new board was elected, and I would like to congratulate new board members as well as Frederick with this challenging time and the challenging appointment, and wish you every success in fulfilling this duty. Yes, we're living through very difficult times. The environment is different from what it was a year ago. The commodity price is collapsing, price of oil down 70%. Usually it is considered that when the commodity prices are going down, it's good. It's bad only for the countries which are producing these commodities, and it's good for the others who are consuming. Unfortunately, it's not the case. The situation is that during the super cycle, significant amount of assets were accumulated, and now the countries which accumulated these assets are forced to draw down on those reserves, and that leads to global sale-off assets, which brings the valuations down, creates additional problems. Another factor is that these companies which are operating in extractive industries, they're cutting down capital expenditures, and that leads to significant drop in manufacturing, in special equipment production, in everything, cuts of jobs. So the end of supercycle is really bad for the countries which are producing commodities, but it's also not very good for those which are consuming them. And commodity producing countries are the ones which are on the front line, the ones that are suffering the most. But the level of this suffering, as Sir Paul was eloquently saying today, really depends on the quality of institutions and quality of policy measures that were taken before and during the supercycle. If you look across the countries, the most suffering countries are those which did not put in place the prudent approach to the management of these revenues. In this particular case, I would like to bring up what we have done in Azerbaijan. The state oil fund of Azerbaijan is the Sovereign Wealth Fund, which was established back in 1999, well in advance when the major oil revenue starting to flow into the country. And that was a far-sighted policy that provided for us to accumulate this money, a significant proportion of this money, and also to sterilize it and invest it outside of the country. So today, we're boasting with almost 100% of GDP in our sovereign wealth fund. At the same time, prudent foreign debt management or domestic debt management is another very important component of this approach. Azerbaijan today has only 12% debt to GDP ratio, which allows us to have significant cushions. We allowed for our currency to devaluate, which is also one of the pillars of prudent macroeconomic management. Not many countries, unfortunately, had these type of reserves and cushions. Not many even have been able to apply these type of macroeconomic prudency. Now, as it was mentioned, the supercycle is over. We are at the beginning of the next supercycle, maybe not next year, maybe in a couple of years. But this is exactly the right time to start thinking of what to put in place, how to make it so that when the next supercycle ends, we will be in a better shape than we are today. And this discussion has to start now. Where we see EITI in this is EITI is a wonderful platform through which all three major players, the government, the extractive companies, and the civil society can come together and discuss these challenges. In our case, in Azerbaijan, EITI was one of the most successful platforms for this type of communication and discussion. We have a very functional MSG, multi-stakeholder group, where we get together and we discuss all the existing problems. Yesterday, we also approved refinements to the EITI standard, and the EITI standard 2016 is a completely different animal. It now covers all the value chain. It starts with the allocation of licenses, contracts. It goes to revenue transparency. It covers beneficial ownership. It goes up to revenue management and revenue allocation. So this is a very good instrument in order to use it to develop these better policy and institutional reforms in order to be ready for the next supercycle. We are going to use the EITI standard 2016 as a basis for our discussions. And Azerbaijan has already completed its 2014 report, and going forward in 2015 report, I think we will be able to use the platform, use the standard as a major platform for this type of long-term planning and long-term discussions. And with that, I think that EITI is has still space to evolve, and it has still, it's not about only transparency, it's also about steering public debate. It's about becoming a place where all the future prudent reforms should be discussed. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. You mentioned, and you're executive director of the State Oil Fund, founded in 1999. We also know that there's been a lot of discussions on setting up and management of Norwegian Oil Fund, but as you say, not everyone has this. And you say this is the right time to set up these kind of structures to prepare for the future. Could you then elaborate a little bit on, there are obvious risks also concerning putting up oil funds. What would they be, and how could you see a role for EITI when it also looks at the handling and management of state oil funds?
Well, clearly establishment of the fund is not a panacea. It's not a solution in itself. It has to be a part of a much broader framework, whereas of all the relevant government institutions are aligned within the framework. As I was mentioning, despite the fact that we have accumulated significant reserves, had we have borrowed from the international market substantially, there would be no point in having an oil fund. So it's a much broader framework, which should include every single policy decision in line with providing the resilience during this ups and downs of the super cycle. And clearly EITI has to play a part by pointing out, but I have to warn that there is sometimes over appreciation or overconfidence on the EITI. We should not think of EITI as a single solution as well. EITI answers a lot of questions, but it's not, again, a solution for all the questions. EITI should be used as a platform for discussion. EITI should be used as a litmus test for where the problems can be and identifying them and showing them, and then by that, allowing the government and the society to debate and to discuss these problems and come up with the proper policy solutions.
Thank you, Hjalmar. And now, Rintaro Tamaki from OECD. Warmly welcome.
Thank you, Frederick, and congratulations on your new law. And on behalf of the OECD, I'd like to extend my thanks to Madam Short for her efforts, not only with an EITI, but also as a champion and advocate of support to developing countries on tax issues. Today, I'd like to focus also on tax issues. Recent commodity price environment has very real implications for government's tax revenue collection. As price falls, so do the profits, and therefore corporate income revenue. Revenue authorities have to focus on how to make up for these shortfalls. This can be done in ways that are constructive ways. For example, improving the ability of tax administration to collect revenues and bring economic activities into the formal economy from informal one. Or destructive ways, for example, through rushing to impose new additional taxation that, if poorly designed, can frighten away foreign investors. There has been positive recent developments that have considerable potential to improve the strength of international tax systems, and by doing so, the potential tax collection of countries here today. Many of you have heard the word BEPS, B-E-P-S. But for those who haven't, you know of it by the stories about big-name global companies, big-name global business, I do not repeat, that don't seem to be paying fair tax. BEPS stands for base erosion and profit shifting. And it is caused by gaps and mismatches in the current international tax system. We estimate corporate income tax revenue globally is losing around $100 billion to $240 billion annually, between 4 to 10% of global corporate income tax revenue as a result of BEPS, base erosion profit shifting. Last year, the G20 and OECD, in consultation with other countries, business, NGOs, and academics, they finalized 15 actions to fundamentally rewrite the international tax rules. These 15 actions are designed to target not only common tax minimization approaches, but more importantly, the underlying structural features of international tax system that enable them to flourish. Once new measures, BEPS measures are implemented, our expectation is profits will be reported where the economic activities that generate them are carried out and value is created. If you allow me to highlight 2 BEPS actions among 15, these 2 actions directly illustrate 2 dimensions to the transparency discussion. The first is tax authorities are able to find out about the offshore operation of multinational company so as to be able to apply their domestic tax laws. Within the BEPS package of reforms, one of the actions requires multinationals to submit information on their global business operations and transfer pricing policies in a master file, as well as more detailed information on related party transactions and the amounts involved in such operations in a local file, country by country. In addition, country-by-country reporting by multinationals will provide high-level information to tax authorities about where key metrics such as profits, sales, employees, and assets are located, and where tax is paid. The second is, the action is designed to ensure countries know what tax preferences have been provided by other countries to attract investment or particular company. One of the BEPS actions is targeted at improving transparency through compulsory spontaneous exchange of information on these preferential tax regimes and rulings. By bringing them into the open amongst countries, this should reduce their prevalence and allow countries to take defensive measures if needed. The BEPS actions truly are, we hope, a game changer. And the difficult task of implementing these measures has just begun. Let me mention 4 initiatives that we have to assist developing countries at this challenging time, perhaps 3, to ensure implementation is as broad, consistent, and rapid as possible. We have been working to create an inclusive framework for global participation in implementation. We will report progress to G20 finance ministers perhaps this weekend on progress so far. First one is an inclusive framework. Secondly, we are also assisting lower capacity developing countries to implement those action items most relevant to them with specific guidance on how to translate the actions, those actions into workable domestic policies. A toolkit on tax incentives, a joint project with an IMF and the World Bank. It has already been delivered. This will help ensure tax incentives, if they are given, are designed effectively and at least revenue cost. Lastly, I wish to mention the OECD's partnership with UNDP, creating a global approach to provide technical assistance to revenue authorities on the pressing tax audit challenges they face. The name of the initiative is Tax Inspectors Without Borders. We have already seen some results with over 185 million US dollars in additional tax revenues recovered so far. This included recent program between France and Senegal that raised 12 million US dollars. I encourage all tax authorities to be interested in participating in this initiative. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Tamaki. As you know, this has been one of the main discussions worldwide latest years. For those of us who have been inside European Union, we have had massive discussions regarding this. Collecting taxes in Greece has been one of the main discussions. It's not so much the tax levels, but actually the authorities actually getting the money in. Otherwise, it doesn't matter what kind of tax level you decide if you don't get the taxes in. And exactly this also, how to collaborate cross-border between countries. In many parts of the world, you mentioned G20, OECD, many are doing this now. Bringing this to EITI, of course, then is the question. We heard EITI is not the answer to everything, okay? But what could be the role of EITI when it comes to tax revenues? Because this has also been discussed inside EITI. Should this be also part, is that helpful if we also have a discussion, if we also see partners that actually show transparency linking to this?
Of course, yes. I'd like to stress our approach, inclusive approach, to implement this important initiative. As you know, OECD has a quite limited membership, only 34 members. We, in collaboration with G20, developed this BEPS initiative, inviting non-OECD G20 countries like China, India, Brazil, South Africa, Indonesia. But it is not quite sufficient. So we have decided to expand our scope of the discussion to support the implementation of BEPS in all developing countries, all levels of development, by joining us, discussing about how effectively we could implement the BEPS. So this is a quite important one.
Very interesting. So now, Miles Litvinov from Publish What You Pay, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Buenos días, señores y señoras, y bonjour, mesdames et messieurs. On behalf of Publish What You Pay, I would like to thank the organizers I would like to thank our chair and my fellow panelists and our hosts in Peru for this opportunity to say a few words on behalf of Publish What You Pay, which itself speaks on behalf of civil society, not exclusively, but we speak for our civil society constituents. I'm not Marinka van Riet, the director of Publish What You Pay International, who is unfortunately unable to be here. I'm the national coordinator of the Publish What You Pay UK Coalition. I also coordinate civil society in the UK EITI, and I sit as a full representative of civil society on the EITI, UK EITI multi-stakeholder group. Following such distinguished panelists, including Professor Sir Paul Collier, whose work I greatly respect, is not easy. But my role here today is to bring the message from civil society to this session. For those who do not know, Publish What You Pay is an international coalition of over 800 civil society organizations in every continent of the world, with a large number of national coalitions and a large number of member organizations from countries where there is no national coalition. And I speak here today very much on behalf of my colleagues, not for myself, and I'm quite aware that if I say anything inappropriate, there will be plenty of colleagues who will hold me to account for it and take me to task for it after I step down from the stage. So I'll be very careful in what I say. I'm not a technical specialist, and there are in the Publish What You Pay coalition some people who are technical specialists, and many people like me who are not. Speaking for myself, if I'm a specialist in anything, I would say it's human rights and participation. And of course, the spirit of the EITI is one about accountability and participation. Because if the EITI is to have genuine meaning, it must respond to citizens' concerns about the oil, gas and mining industries, concerns that we all share because we are all in this room together out of those concerns. And to express a voice for those people who legally and morally, in most, if not all countries, are the true owners of the oil, gas and minerals. Those resources are not owned by governments in most cases. They're not owned by the companies that develop them on our behalf. They are owned by present generations and future generations. And it's our task in the EITI to steward and safeguard the use of those resources for current generations, but with an eye, as Professor Collier has reminded us, for the future as well. So we all share the same goal. We come to the table from different starting points. And the task for civil society and for the EITI is to balance off those different starting points in ways that lead to genuine progress for human well-being now and in the future. So I have not got remarks specifically on the era of low commodity prices. I agree with those who believe that commodity prices will rise again. But my remarks are based on continuing concerns, continuing truths, if you like, that whether commodity prices are high or low, it's our shared responsibility to ensure that the exploitation of commodities is done in the greatest public interest for the greatest public good. So I will just maybe mention two brief points. Civil society is very aware and appreciative of the progress that the EITI has made since 2003 and the unusual, if not unique, balance and mutual understanding and trust between industry, governments and civil society that it has permitted to take place. We don't want to break that trust, we don't want to destroy that balance, but we at the same time see our role is to push the initiative forward. The EITI cannot stand still and must respond to changing priorities, changing agendas. And therefore, very briefly, to say that one of the intentions of civil society through the Publish What You Pay, or the intentions of the Publish What You Pay coalition and our allies, is a hope that working together we can make the EITI do more to address the key challenges of our time. And from a civil society perspective, these are inequality. The world is growing more unequal within and between countries, including my own country in the UK. And to address the restriction of civil society space that is happening in many countries. And amongst our colleagues here in Lima this week, there are people whose own colleagues or who themselves have been tortured, who've been imprisoned, whose families have been harassed, whose NGOs have been closed down by repressive governments. And that is something that we have to fight against. And thirdly, the elephant in the room, climate change. We have the new Paris Agreement from the Conference of Parties. The EITI must seek ways, and we know it won't be easy, but must seek ways to respond to the environmental challenge we face. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Miles. I think you made a very good description on also the EITI view on the people has the right to the revenues of the national resources. I know that you want to read a statement, but could you just shortly elaborate, because it is, as you say, a very new situation with low commodity prices, the fall of the oil price. Could this be an opportunity for civil society to bring forward their positions? Are people more aware that there are actually tougher times and the need for transparency, the need for accuracy among the governance of national resources have increased? Could you see that?
I would say that if we bear in mind the poorest of the poor, and no civil society organization of genuine legitimacy, I would say, can afford not to bear in mind the poorest of the poor and the most deprived people all around the world. Possibly for them, where the commodity prices have been high and are now low, is not, many of them would not know. They won't know that. Did they see benefits from high commodity prices? No. Are they aware of the economic implications of low commodity prices? Probably not. So I would say the opportunity for civil society remains as it has always been. The challenge and the opportunity is to make the voices of the marginalized people of our world heard, listened to, and responded to. Thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, I've been asked by my colleagues in Publish What You Pay to read part of a public statement that our coalition issued yesterday, Wednesday. It's 3 paragraphs, so I hope it won't take too much time. And the statement is headed, EIT governance failures threaten independent civil society. It runs as follows. On Tuesday in Lima, on the eve of the 2016 Global EITI Conference, more than 100 civil society representatives took a principled stance to boycott the members' meeting, the highest governing body of the EITI. The impetus for the boycott was the improper and illegitimate interference in civil society's right to self-selection of their representatives to the EITI International Board, and the addition of a civil society candidate to the list of civil society nominees without the support of the broad civil society constituency. This was in violation of the agreed procedures for nominating civil society representatives to the board. In advance of the meeting, civil society tried to work towards resolution by demanding that the illegitimate candidate's name be removed, but to no avail.
civil society was fully ready to enter the members' meeting, provided that the illegitimate candidate was removed from the roster. Civil society sent a representative into the members' meeting to make this position known. Outgoing EITI chair Claire Short, who chaired the meeting, chose to proceed with the meeting despite a majority of one of the key stakeholders not being present. During the meeting, the civil society representative was given the opportunity for a brief intervention before being prevented from fully elaborating civil society's concerns. In this context, the decisions made during that meeting are being called into question. While the sixth name was ultimately withdrawn by the nominating organisation during the members' meeting, this was done in a manner and on a time frame that made it impossible for civil society to rejoin the meeting. All of this is contrary to the spirit and principles of the EITI and constituted a breach of the governance process and a gross disregard for the trust we have worked to establish over the past decade. Civil society welcomes EITI Chair nominee Fredrik Reinfeldt's willingness to work with Publish What You Pay. During the 2016 Publish What You Pay Global Assembly, Mr. Reinfeldt addressed Publish What You Pay members and affirmed the critical role of the coalition in making the EITI a strong and credible initiative. All stakeholders need to remain committed to the core principles of the EITI and protect civil society's independence. We call for a review of the EITI Articles of Association and demand accountability to ensure that encroachment on civil society space never happens again. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Miles. I know that for many of you this was important that this message could be brought through, and we respect civil society, and I think you've seen now the openness that we listened to your message, and I will get back to this, as I said, in the closing session and also when we discuss this on the board in the afternoon. So thank you very much for your intervention and also for reading this statement. We are running a little late, but just to give the opportunity, if there is someone who have a question to someone in this, yes, if someone has a question, we could. Someone in the back, I don't see really if someone is going with the, yeah, absolutely at the back. We have a gentleman.
Thanks very much. Johnny West, Open Oil. It's a question for Paul. In your list of wish list for transparency, particularly because you make the distinction between short-term and long-term, I wonder whether you think that after the Paris Agreement, some aspect of transparency has to be towards the essentially transnational management of natural resources, which must now happen if you're following the logic of the Paris Agreement, to which 195 heads of state signed in December. The simple logic of the carbon budget and the inability to produce out all of the discovered reserves is necessarily going to involve some element of transnational management. And even though traditionally and the weight of EITI has been around fiscal reporting and revenues, even within that area, one can see its relevance to carbon emission management, because some of those discussions will relate to the relative developmental benefit accruing from some forms of fossil fuel production relative to others, as to who gets the quotas within the remaining carbon budget that's left. So I wondered if you'd like to comment on that.
Yeah, thanks very much. Good, very good question. 2 points. One is really about stranded assets. It's clear that as the world gradually moves to greater control of carbon emissions, the days of exploitation of carbon-based energy are now numbered. And so, far from the world running out of oil, there will be oil left in the ground. And that raises the question, whose oil? The world will never run out of coal, but coal will be left in the ground. Whose coal? So there's 2 implications of that. One is the old idea in economics, which is called the hoteling principle. Nothing to do with hotels. Hoteling was a guy. The principle that commodity prices would just go up continuously at the underlying world real interest rate. That's just wrong. It's just wrong. Right? We're in a world where soon enough carbon-based energy prices will be trending down, not up. And so that's a further reason why you've got to think of these resources as temporary. They're temporary partly because in the short term there's this price cycle, prices go up, prices come down, partly because you're depleting a natural asset and it will physically run out, but above all because a lot of these energy assets are going to become obsolescent as regulation gradually tightens on them. So that's one lesson. It makes it much more important to think of yourself as depleting an asset, and therefore you better build up the other assets. And I commend, you did it, Botswana did it. Very poor countries can do very sensible things. Very rich countries can do very stupid things. But it's more important that poor countries get the stuff right than the rich countries. The rich countries can afford to be idiots. Poor countries can't. But the second point that you raise is who ends up with the stranded assets? Whose coal is left in the ground? I've got a little paper with my colleague Tony Venables called Closing Coal, which has just come out and which addresses this issue. And our argument is that it's very important to resist a tempting mantra which says, well, if we don't need any more coal, we shouldn't open up new coal resources. And that sounds plausible, but has a very bad distributional implication, because the new coal resources are in the poorest countries. The existing coal resources are in the richest countries. And so my proposal, along with Tony Venables, is that the world organizes a gradual closure of the world's coal industry. Coal is vital to close. If we do anything in climate change, we close the coal industry because it's so polluting. Right? So it's a question of who closes first. And in our scheme, you start with the coal in the richest countries. You start with America, Germany, Australia, Sweden, and you close those coal industries. Until they've closed, countries like Mozambique should be entirely free to open up. How dare the rich use their power to tell countries as poor as Mozambique to leave its coal in the ground when they themselves are taking their coal out of the ground. And that is the sort of policy that is at the moment being used by the directors from the rich countries on the board of the World Bank. Right? They're resisting loans to exploit coal in poor countries whilst exploiting the coal themselves. And that is just morally disgraceful. Right? So let's think of a gradual program in which first the rich world closes its coal, and then the middle income world. Right? And finally, we move to the poor world, which will also have to close its coal industry, but not yet. But I just recommend that closing coal paper, because that agenda answers the question. It's compatible with addressing the climate change issue, but it's also compatible with addressing the equity issue. And thanks for the question.
Yeah, thank you, Sir Paul. I think we must wrap this up now because we have a lot of other things that is on the program. I thank the distinguished panel for your interventions and answer to my questions and from the audience. And I thank you all for listening in. Thank you very much.